Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Walter Dial, who's tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors here in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable or transferable business value and for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable or transferable and then exit successfully and on your own terms and conditions. And today we want to discuss something very unfortunate that both Walter and I see and hear about all too often, tragic events really that could be easily avoided with the right advanced planning. Because of the work we do, we're often made aware of stories of businesses that die when the owner has unexpectedly died or become permanently incapacitated. And so this is the planning area that this is a planning area that we're quite passionate about for obvious reasons. And we want to help you make sure your business survives, even if you do not survive.
Yeah, that's definitely right, Pat. Share a story with listeners that you're very familiar with because it just happened about 2 months ago. A really good friend of one of our clients and a business owner that we both know passed away unexpectedly. And as it turns out, he really had no plans in place for the business to continue without him. He didn't really even have a good estate plan in place. And of course, it couldn't happen at a worse time. It happens in the middle of the COVID crisis. So his spouse, very sadly, she's lost as to what to do. She wasn't involved in the business. So not only does she have to deal with the personal tragedy that's occurred, but now she's got people bugging her about what's going on with the business. So it's just a really bad situation. I mean, customers and employees are leaving. When this situation happens, employees, they got to worry about themselves. Is the business just going to go under and one day their paycheck is going to bounce or they're not going to get one? So they immediately, understandably, start trying to take care of their own family, which oftentimes means leaving the business and finding a new employer. The business has a lot of debt that's got to be liquidated. And of course, not only due to COVID, but also when you lose the owner of a business who we've talked about a million times is way too involved in every detail of the business, the value of that business just tanks. And we're seeing that here. I mean, it's really sad. Our client who we work with was interested in trying to help the situation by maybe going in and acquiring a segment of the business or some assets or anything. And we were looking at that. It wasn't really going to make sense. But at the end of the day, her lawyer basically said, just wait for him to declare bankruptcy. You can go in and get whatever you want at pennies on the dollar. So it's just a really sad situation. And I think one of the things that's saddest about it is it didn't have to unfold this way. It could have been avoided. So this is an area of planning that we bring up, immediately in any new exit planning engagement. And one of our first steps is try to secure the current value of the business, either through insurance or through the things that we're going to be talking about today. Because like this example illustrates, if the planning isn't done, the value of the business can just be destroyed really, really quickly. And it affects the employees, the customers, the vendors, the suppliers, the owners. But most of all, it just has a devastating effect on the owner's spouse and their family, especially if they were dependent on the value of the business. So our topic today is business continuity, a plan for the unexpected. So first, let's go ahead and define what we mean by business continuity. So business continuity planning is all about preparing your business to maintain essential business functions for potential disasters and unpredictable events. And when you think about it, a lot of businesses, like I know our firm here, it was funny, back in the beginning days of Bitcoin, we actually had a couple Bitcoin. And we only had them so that if our system ever got hijacked, they always demand payment in Bitcoin to give you control back. Unfortunately, we got rid of our Bitcoin at some point, and I don't think it was worth $20,000 a Bitcoin at the time. But anyway, so a lot of businesses do have certain plans in place for certain specific disasters. And that's one, some type of business interruption where your IT is taken over. Or, it could be other types of disruption to the business, maybe a flood or things like that. But often, it could be a cyber attack, a fire, things like that. But oftentimes, the one event that is most likely to happen, which is the premature death or disability of the owner, is not properly planned for. And as we've already discussed through the example, there's numerous consequences if this area is not properly addressed. So we want to help you understand at least some of these challenges faced by sole owners and provide you with a few action steps today. So Pat, let's start with the possible continuity problems. What would you say are the biggest possible continuity problems that a business faces?
Yeah, thanks, Walter. First let me mention that business continuity in its fundamental sense, and just to put add just this point to your definition, is not about protecting the owner's family, is it? But it's instead about preserving and protecting the business in both the short term and the long term. And should its most important asset, you, the business owner, as Walter said, die or become permanently incapacitated. So what are the common continuity problems the sole owner is going to have to be concerned about? Certainly ownership continuity, or who's going to own the business if the current owner is no longer available. That's the most obvious problem. But really it's only one of four possible problems. And here are the other three. The company's loss of financial resources, loss of key talent, really specifying you, the owner, loss of employees and customers. Walter referred to that earlier. And, I find it's easiest to communicate these things in a story. So let's start with a case study. Joe was a successful, hardworking owner of a construction company for 20 years. And like most business owners who are successful, he tended to make all the decisions by himself, and the business still ran too much through him. At age 50, he thought that he was way too young to be thinking overly concerned about his death or disability and how those events might impact his business and family. He was a healthy guy. He worked out regularly, ran long races, and just a healthy guy. And then one day, as he was running on the treadmill, he dropped dead. And so Joe's death, of course, was a massive tragedy for his family, but his failure to make any plans whatsoever for the business was also tragic. No one, including his wife, knew what Joe's wishes were with respect to continuing the business or selling the business. And no one, especially his wife, knew the overall financial condition of the business or any of the admin processes or systems or operational concerns. So day one after Joe's passing, no one was really clear on what to do or how to proceed in operating the business, or if it should even continue at all. The business had a line of credit that Joe would use to just operate the business. Payroll he used it for payroll. That line of credit was called by the bank almost immediately, as it was secured by Joe's personal financial statements. And there was a little cash on hand to operate the business at this point. The key employees were understandably nervous about their futures and were only certain of one thing, really, that the business was not going to survive very long after Joe's death. So these employees who had been loyal to Joe for years, some of them, a couple of them had started with him 20 years ago, loyal, but they began to look for new employment. They had to, which they actually were not finding difficult, because competitors who had learned of Joe's passing had actually reached out to express condolences, but also slip in there, oh, and by the way, if you if you're looking for a new job, we've always been impressed with you. Why don't you come on over and talk to us? So, employees left, and then what happens after that or during that? Customers leave, vendors, suppliers. The only option for Joe's estate at that point was to shut down the business, which was once thriving, a business that for years served all those stakeholders as well as Joe and his family. So in Joe's situation, we can see those four problems. He had no plan for ownership continuity as the business simply became part of his estate, depending on the executor to decide what to do with the business. The business no longer would be supported by Joe financially. The business lost Joe himself and all his talent, experience, and skill. And then, of course, the business lost employees and customers. So that's a story. Actually, it's a story almost identical, isn't it, to the one that you communicated at the outset, Walter? So I probably didn't need to tell another one, but it doesn't hurt. But those are, you asked the question, what are the four problems? Those are the four problems.
Okay, sorry. So Pat, you've done a great job laying out the problems. So what's the solution?
Yes, well, that's absolutely, the number one problem, ownership continuity. That's absolutely the most critical issue with solely owned businesses, because there is no continuity unless owners plan in advance to create a future ownership group or identify and equip a potential successor that could buy the business when the owner passes. Since there's no co-owner, you must provide the business continuity, even if it's your estate is going to own the business, or the trust is going to own the business for the benefit of the family. And you need to do this by continuing by securing the continued service of important employees. Because if the employees leave, as we pointed out, then everything starts to break down. There is no business a lot of times. So solution, put a plan in place now to prevent your employees from leaving during one of these trigger events, because they're essential for the continuance of the business. This is best accomplished through what we would call a stay bonus. And a stay bonus, it's written, and it's a funded plan that provides a bonus, usually, and it's significant, usually over a 12 to 18-month period, paid out either monthly or quarterly, for employees to remain with the company during this transition from your ownership to new ownership. And typically the stay bonus is funded with life insurance, and it's in an amount sufficient to pay all the bonuses that you want to pay to whoever it is that you consider to be key and important to stay on during the transition. This is very important. The plan is communicated to these employees when it's created, so they know that a plan exists, and consequently that thought and planning, you put thought and planning and money to pay salaries in place that's going to ensure the continuation of the business. They know there's a plan, and they know they have been considered in the plan. And then the next step is to do what Joe didn't do. And well, I just mentioned it, communicate your continuity instructions now, prior. At a minimum, you should communicate, and again in writing, can't stress this enough, in writing, your wishes as to what should be done with the business upon your death or permanent incapacity. What do you want to, who do you want to ultimately own the business? Would it be sale to a third party? Would it be sale to insiders, a successor, or maybe even children? And all of this should be coordinated with a current and updated estate plan. How many times, Walter, do we ask a business owner, when was the last time you updated your estate plan, only to hear maybe never?
What estate plan?
What estate plan? Actually, it happened just yesterday. I was in a conversation, and they don't have one. Never had one. Been in business a long time, 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and then again in writing, designate those key employees or others who can be given responsibility to run the business operations and admin and make financial decisions. Name any advisors and anybody else, such as a friendly competitor who could be consulted in the ownership transfer process. If you want the business to be sold, state that intention, list the names and contacts maybe of businesses that have expressed an interest in acquiring your company or who you think would make an appropriate successor or owner. You might desire to indicate the business be sold to key employees or maybe continued in the family or liquidated. If that's what you want, you might want that. That might be the best thing to do. But the point is to make that decision now and get it in writing. The choice is absolutely yours, but make it while you're still living, and there's no better time to do it. And again, guess what? Do all of this in writing on what we call and refer to as business continuity instructions, and then give that completed document, business continuity instructions, to your spouse, to whoever it is you trust, and then your key advisors. And then, Walter, you know what? Problem number 2, loss of financial resources. Why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, I will. You know, I was thinking, Pat, while you were talking, I was just kind of picturing your example of Joe's business, and you take the two scenarios, one where, like your example illustrated, where he's done nothing, and you're an employee of that company and you find out the owner just died. I mean, immediately you're going to be panicked and you're going to be trying to figure out how to take care of yourself and your family, as opposed to a scenario that follows the recommendation you just gave, where the employees are all aware that if something happens to the owner, there's a plan in place to, number one, fund bonuses that are going to keep them there, and it's going to provide for the orderly transition of ownership in some way. You know, that's going to just take all the stress out of it for an employee, because one thing you mentioned was that these stay bonuses are substantial, and the ones that we've seen, I know, have oftentimes been as much as 1 year's salary. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. You know, in that situation, an employee can say, okay, yeah, the business is, you know, it's horrible what's happened, but I know that there's a funded plan where I'm going to get an extra year's salary for sticking around. So they're going to do that. And, you know, oftentimes, if you're the type of business where you're communicating this type of thing with your employees, you've got the type of company culture, most likely, where the employees are not going to want to abandon the ship. You know, they're going to care about the business because obviously you do, and you've communicated these things to them. So it's just a much, much better scenario. But let me go ahead and address your question. So, yeah, there definitely is a real problem with the loss of financial resources. And I think, you know, people don't think of it probably this way, but in a closely held business, a lot of the financial backing of the company lies with the owner. I mean, how many of our small clients, you know, are not required to personally guarantee a line of credit, or aren't required to personally guarantee a lease? I mean, most of them are required to do that. So a lot of the financial resources of the company are actually tied to the financial viability of the owner. And if he's just died, the bank is going to be very concerned. The landlord could be very concerned. So there's a lot of financial stress on the company at that point. The other thing is, a lot of these closely held businesses are not very well capitalized. I mean, the owners take the money out, generally speaking, knowing that if the company needs it, they can just put it back in. So oftentimes these businesses are very poorly capitalized, which again adds that much more financial stress to the company when a situation like this occurs. But, you know, like every problem, if it's thought out, if you think about it ahead of time and you plan for it, there are solutions that can be put in place. So the first one, and Pat's already talked about this, is simply putting life insurance in place so that the funds are there to keep the company going for a while. Now, that could be insurance that's sufficient enough to fund the stay bonuses, and then you're going to want it to be sufficient enough to fund at least a few months of operations. I mean, no matter what great plan you have in place, there's still going to be some unrest and some uncertainty. So chances are there's going to be a bit of a financial hit. So you want to have insurance sufficient enough to anticipate that. But keep in mind, insurance, it's part of the solution because it provides cash. But for a business to actually survive, and when we say survive, we really look at that two ways. One is survive in the sense that it can maintain most of its value until you're able to sell it. Or when we say survive, we mean that it's actually able to be, the ownership and management is able to be transferred to those key employees or whoever you've designated as coming on board as the successor. So in order for that to happen, you've got to have something in place that, we talk about, no matter what the topic is, it seems like we always come back to this. And that is that owners are way too involved in the day-to-day operations of their business. If they don't have a management team or employees, a group of employees who can really step up and run the business, no matter how much insurance they have, they're going to be looking at an uphill struggle for sure. So can't emphasize enough that insurance is very important, but building out that management team and being able to step away from your business as the owner is really the key to all aspects of succession and exit planning. You've got to have a team in place. The business has got to have transferable value, meaning it can operate without you. So Pat, let's take a look at problem number 3, loss of key talent.
Yeah, so, when most of the work that we do is helping owners build that business that's going to be sellable and transferable to maximize their exit options. And whenever we're doing that, one of the key drivers of protecting business value is the key employees and protecting loss against that. And so a lot of times we'll talk about, okay, Sarah, who is your chief operating officer, boy, if you lose her, how's that going to impact the value of your business? And sometimes it'll be a long list. Well, the list can be even longer if in the case where the sole owner dies or becomes permanently incapacitated. Because as you know, Walter, we've mentioned it many times, these small businesses that we work with, more often than not, the owner is still a big part of it. And so it can have an even greater impact on the business, losing you, the owner, than even your most key employee. Your talents, experience, relationships with customers, employees, vendors, and all, it's going to be tough to replace, especially in the short term. And if you actually can be replaced, it's never going to be inexpensive to make it happen. So, and without planning, few businesses have the financial resources or the successive management in place to make it through one of these trigger events. And so if your business does depend largely on you, it's unlikely that any amount of life insurance or other source of cash will be completely sufficient to meet the need. You will also need to create value distinct from you in the form of successive management. So there it is again, successive management team or key employees who can step in and up and operate the company. So the same solutions, that's the good news. You can kill a couple birds with a couple stones here. The same solutions for problem number 2 apply here for problem number 3. Just adequate life insurance coverage to have enough cash on hand to replace you and all your talent, skill, and the cost of replacing you, and then that successive management team. And then I'll just roll right into problem number 4 here, which is along the same lines, a loss of employees and customers. Too often a consequence, well, we've mentioned it over and over, we don't have to mention it again in depth, but too often that's a consequence of an owner's death or early departure is loss of employees and customers. Employees have to know there's a plan that exists that guarantees their comp and names your successor so that they have vision for the future, vision personally, vision for the company, that it's going to exist at least for a period of time. And if such a plan's not in place, employees are often going to get anxious about where their next paycheck's going to come from in their future job and career. And if the workforce leaves, contracts aren't completed, work's not performed, customers leave too. So guess what? The solution to number 4 of preventing the departure of employees and customers, same as for the other problems, really. A written stay bonus funded by life insurance and communicated to the employees when it's actually created or prepared. A succession of management plan, which you prepare now with the names of the people written who would take charge. Your decisions made today or as soon as possible regarding the sale, continuation, or liquidation of the business in the event of your early demise, and then provide that to your spouse, family, and trusted advisors in writing. So, Walter, you want to talk about, kind of wrap us up, summarize, and provide some action steps here as we close?
Yeah, one thing before I do that, let me just follow up on one thing you were talking about as far as loss of customers. One of the, I think, really great things about the business continuity instructions that we provide is you kind of list out your major customers and who's responsible for them, because it's important that when a tragedy like this happens, that your major customers don't hear about it through the grapevine. Instead, someone that they're familiar working with at the business can contact them, give them assurance that, hey, this is tragic and horrible, but a plan is in place. You don't need to be concerned that we're not going to be able to come through for you. And that's all part of the business continuity instructions, which I think is a really cool aspect of it. So let's talk about action steps. So we've talked about, number 1 is you just really need to assess your situation. Do you have a plan for continued ownership in the event of your death or permanent incapacity? And if so, is it coordinated with your estate plan? That's kind of the threshold question. Then you can start looking a little more in depth. Is the business dependent on you for financial support? If so, you're going to need to take some steps to maybe, talk to your bank about these personal guarantees and your landlord. Maybe, have a pot of money that can go back into the business. And of course, the insurance is going to be important there. And, start thinking, how is the business going to be impacted if something happens to you? And all of a sudden, your experiences, your talents, your skills, relationships are all gone. I think it's going to really drive home the fact that, you know what? I really need to start raising up some people in this company in each of those areas. When it comes to just relationships with customers or developing certain skills, it's something you really need to work on. And is there a plan in place, like we've talked about, to retain employees in event of your death or disability? Do you have a stay bonus plan in place? Those are all areas you need to review. And again, take a look at your insurance, make sure you have enough coming in and, what triggers it, all that type of thing. And keep, it's not just life insurance, it's disability insurance as well. And assess your current management team. I mean, is the plan going to be that if something happens to you, you've got a management team in place that can take over? And number 2, do they want to take over? So going back to Pat's point, which he made a number of times, communication is critical in this area for sure. Everyone has to be on board. Everyone has to be heading in the same direction. And then finally, create written business continuity instructions. The people you leave behind are going to be so grateful that you've done this. It's going to make their life easier. It's going to help you to maintain the value of your business. And it's going to help whatever your succession plan at that point is, whether it's sell to a third party or transition to management team, it's going to make that go a lot smoother. So if you want or need assistance with any of these areas, please contact us. Pat, I know there's a business continuity PDF that you make available. How can listeners access that?
Yeah, actually, it's good idea. They can go to nslp.com, and if they go there, there's going to be a pop-up window, and if they I forget. It's either sign up for the blog, sign up for the podcast. I forget what it is. But if you do that, you'll be able to download the real nice. It's a real nice piece. It's very helpful. It's a fillable PDF. You'll be able to download the business continuity instructions if you do that. And you know what, Walter? We'll put it in the description of this episode.
Perfect. That's great. And listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat at 301-859-0860. You can reach me at 301-951-9090. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and nslp.com. As always, thanks for listening. If you've benefited from listening, please consider sharing the podcast on social media. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.